This is Series 3 of Away, a podcast for anyone exploring 12-step sobriety. I'm your host, Steph Roberts. Hello, my friends and listeners. It's sort of one and the same, isn't it? Friends/listeners, hyphen. I think this is technically maybe episode 12 of Series 3. And we're finally going to look at step 11 in the 12 and 12, which I have as page 96. Quick update on me. We've moved in, pretty comfortable. Things are going well. Commute to work is amazing. There's still a lot to do. I'm fully exhausted. Just the thought of putting together another piece of furniture just feels unbearable. But relativity helps a lot there. Financially, things are much better because we did finally close on the house, and so I can put some money away for a rainy day and worry a little bit less about the present and the future. And while having a little money does not solve all my problems and soothe all my woes, it certainly helps. Any more money than this wouldn't make me any happier, but not having to juggle bills and not having to worry about having a negative balance in my bank account is a great relief. So there is contentment in that. Speaking of which, step 11, meditation, quiet time to yourself, all of that was a key in getting through the past couple of months for me, being able to take a moment alone, completely alone. And that's different from isolating. Just taking a minute to look inward, to find the strength within myself to do the next thing I had to do, whether I liked it or not. So let's look at step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So just before we do anything, I just want to rephrase that for the atheist, or for the person who wants to help an atheist, or for someone who just doesn't know, wants another way to look at it. Sought through quiet contemplation to improve ourselves in order to improve the world around us. Sought through quiet contemplation to improve ourselves in order to improve the world around us. So I said this in my Big Book Study podcast, but I think it probably bears repeating. This step I see as pretty simple in many ways. It can be taken further and further and deeper, but simply put, every now and then take a minute. Put down the phone, turn off the television, put down your book, shut down the computer, and just chill. Take a minute to think about how you want to be in the world. Take a minute to consider how you can improve yourself and the world around you. What actions can you take that will lead you towards serenity and away from chaos, but also make the world a little bit better? This is an effort to move you away from chaos and toward serenity, but also so that you can contribute those things to the world. Okay. The first sentence, prayer and meditation are our principal means of conscious contact with God. And whatever you believe, it can be just meditation. Meditation is not only for people who believe in the supernatural. If you haven't yet, because I've mentioned it before, if you haven't yet, and regardless of what you believe, check out Sam Harris's app for meditation. He's an atheist, and he talks about and trains in meditation that isn't spiritually based, per se. Depends on what your definition of spirituality is, but, right, okay. So check that out. Okay, reading. We AAs are active folk, enjoying the satisfactions of dealing with the realities of life, usually for the first time in our lives, and strenuously trying to help the next alcoholic who comes along. So it isn't surprising that we often tend to slight serious meditation and prayer as something not really necessary. To be sure, we feel it is something that might help us meet an occasional emergency, but at first many of us are apt to regard it as somewhat mysterious skill of clergymen, from which we may hope to get a secondhand benefit, or perhaps we don't believe in these things at all. To certain newcomers and to those one-time agnostics who still cling to the AA group as their higher power, claims for the power of prayer may, despite all logic and experience and proof of it, still be unconvincing or quite objectionable. All right, let's back up. So basically, I see this as saying, now that we're not drunk or hungover all the time, we're basically normal people who face normal problems, and like other normal people, we'll need to handle them in the best way we can and without our old crutch. Right? So we're at this sort of average starting place. Now, Bill is writing this, as I've said in previous podcasts, and when he's in a particularly dark place. So I often feel like here he's trying to convince himself while trying to convince others, the reader, that there is, in fact, logic. Better still, there's proof that prayer works. It's like something deep inside him seems still to be rebelling against the notion that it works. And that's fine. I mean, I think we're human. We do that, right? It's a very human thing to do. That said, this is a book that is influencing many, many people, or hoping to. And so, kind of take some of this with a grain of salt, which I say all the time. Let's move on to 97. I guess the bottom of 96. We well remember how something deep inside us kept rebelling against the idea of bowing before any god. Many of us had strong logic, too, which proved there was no God, whatever. What about all the accidents, sickness, cruelty, and injustice in the world? What about those unhappy lives, which were the direct result of unfortunate birth and uncontrollable circumstances? Surely there could be no justice in this scheme of things, and therefore no God at all. I mean, I think some people definitely rebel against the idea of bowing before any God. That was not my problem. We talked about this in the Big Book Study podcast episodes. For some people, the humility of prayer is difficult. That is, their ego is their problem. But as we know now, that is not true for everyone. It is often not true for women, and I assume for many men, though I don't know as many stories or have as many connections with sober men as I do with sober women. I've certainly heard from some of you that, ego was not your primary problem. So the act of humility of prayer may not be the rebellion for you. If you are a believer, you want or you're looking, that may not be it. That's what he identifies here. Because as we know, Bill's primary problem was, or one of his major problems was ego. But again, so that's not true for everybody. It may be something else. And then this, what about all the accidents, sickness, cruelty? So I think by now, you know, my opinion is that it is all chaos. That religion tries to help us through that, but that really the universe is chaos. And there is no such thing as fairness and justice. It just is. There's no explanation. And the sooner we accept that, the easier life is. But that's just my opinion. And really, this could also be your philosophy if you're a believer. Because God is not necessarily both omniscient and omnipotent. So if God is either omniscient or omnipotent, there's a difference there, right? If he's omniscient, he knows all, but doesn't necessarily have the power, the potency, to do anything, to change it. So he knows all and he can see all, but that's all. An omnipotent and all-powerful God, an omnipotent God, has the power to change it. So he has the knowledge and the power. So maybe that will help you if you're a believer looking to form a philosophy around your higher power. Your higher power, if you believe in something supernatural and you have a higher power and you call it God or whatever you call it, may be omniscient, all-knowing, but without the power, the ability necessarily to change it, which then makes it sort of easier perhaps to accept the unfairness or the injustice that you perceive in the world. Whereas I accept that it's chaos and that there is no justice or fairness and it kind of is what it is and we make our way through it. If you don't believe that, but you also struggle with this idea that how could God do that, perhaps your God, perhaps your higher power is omniscient but not omnipotent. Still, though, there's no proof. Just saying. Okay, moving down the page. We liked AA all right, and were quick to say that it had done miracles, but we recoiled from meditation and prayer as obstinately as the scientist who refused to perform a certain experiment lest it prove his pet theory wrong. They really don't like scientists, huh? Of course, we finally did experiment, and when unexpected results followed, we felt different. In fact, we knew different. And so we were sold on meditation and prayer. And that, we have found, can happen to anybody who tries. It has been well said that almost the only scoffers at prayer are those who never tried it enough. Blah, blah, blah. Maybe you have, but I have never used the word miracle for AA. I try never to use it, ever. But, again, this is sort of forward thinking for the time. There is enough evidence now behind how and why this program works for some people that we actually don't even need to believe in miracles to believe that AA works. AA works for some people. This kind of therapy works for some people. Group therapy works for some people. Cognitive behavioral therapy works for some people. I would argue that if you are a believer and you see a miracle somewhere in here, it's that these men in 1939 discovered this long before a lot of the science of the psychology was available. So they were, you know, if you believe they were touched by something, a miracle happened there. Not so much in, this is the interconnectedness of humans. We are animals that need to be with our species and derive comfort and safety. We're not loners, we're pack animals. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. But we have the sort of science now that proves that these kinds of steps, even without God in them, work for some people to recover. So it follows then, right, that you don't have to believe in anything to do this. You just have to believe that there is good within you and believe that you can find the power to use that good responsibly to go through this program and recover from alcoholism, and then potentially make other changes in your life, calling again upon that goodness within you. And I'll talk about this in a minute, but that's what meditation helps you to do. It helps you not only to find these things within you in the moment you're meditating, but it helps you to identify that feeling so you can recall it whenever you need to. Bottom of the page. And when we turn away from meditation and prayer, we likewise deprive our minds, our emotions, and our intuitions of vitally needed support. As the body can fail its purpose for lack of nourishment, so can the soul. True, right? That's true. I just happen to think of my soul as my mind and my mental health. So for me, time out, time alone, quiet reflection are all important, really important to stay sane. You want to add some prayer to it because you're a believer? Do it. I don't see any harm in that, obviously. But meditation isn't only for the spiritually, supernaturally inclined people. All right, let's skip down to the next page and just read for a minute. As we have seen, self-searching is the means by which we bring new vision, action, and grace to bear upon the dark and negative side of our natures. It is a step in the development of that kind of humility that makes it possible for us to receive God's help. Just cross out God. Makes it possible for us to receive help. Yet it is only a step. We will want to go further. We will want the good that is in us all, even in the worst of us, to flower and to grow. Most certainly, we shall need bracing air and an abundance of food. But first of all, we shall want sunlight. Nothing much can grow in the dark. Meditation is our step out into the sun. How then shall we meditate? The actual experience of meditation and prayer across the centuries is, of course, immense. The world's libraries and places of worship are a treasure trove for all seekers. It is to be hoped that every AA who has a religious connection which emphasizes meditation will return to the practice of that devotion as never before. But what about the rest of us who, less fortunate, don't even know how to begin? Well, we might start like this. First, let's look at a really good prayer. We won't have far to seek. The great men and women of all religions have left us a wonderful supply. Here, let us consider one that is a classic. The author was a man who, for several hundred years now, has been rated as a saint. We won't be biased or scared off by the fact, because although he was not an alcoholic, he did, like us, go through the emotional wringer. And as he came out the other side of the painful experience, this prayer was his expression of what he could then see, feel, and wish to become. I think they call this the Step 11 prayer. Lord, make me a channel of thy peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds. It is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. Granted, that is a truly beautiful prayer, and the sentiment, the desire of this prayer is right on in every way. If you're a believer, it's a really solid Christian prayer, right? Saint, Christian. It is Christian. Let's not, doesn't take away from the sentiment, but I'm just saying. It is also a prayer that is really easy to reframe, not as a prayer, but as a mantra, as an intention for anyone. In your time of quiet contemplation, meditation, or prayers, you may say to yourself, just simply, where there is hatred, I will try to bring love. Where there is sadness, I will try to bring joy. Where there is darkness, I will try to bring light. My aim is to give as much as I receive or more. My aim is to love, not only to seek love, right? So you can take the Lord, the Christianity, all of that stuff out of there and have the same intention, have the same desire, have the same sentiment. As beginners in meditation, we might now reread this prayer several times very slowly, savoring every word and trying to take in the deep meaning of each phrase and idea. Yes, I'm on board with that. In meditation that does not involve a supernatural element, I keep saying the word intention, and that's because you often set an intention at the beginning of your meditation practice. Or I should say, that's what I was taught and what I do. At the beginning of the practice, I set an intention like, today I will practice patience, today I will practice kindness. And if I'm all over the place in my head, I'll repeat these things throughout my practice. Whenever my mind wanders, I'll repeat my intention to bring myself back into the present moment and to get the obsessive thinking out of my head. If I'm in a place where I can sort of let go freely, let my mind go, really be in the meditation, in the quiet space, then I will seal my meditation with my intentions. So I'll begin it and I'll end it with those intentions. The point, and I'm sure I'll reiterate this again, and I've said it again, but the point of meditation is not really just in the moment of meditation. It's meant to be called upon when necessary. So what comes from meditation, the sense of serenity, comfort, calmness, whatever it brings to you, which it doesn't always do, by the way, but when you sort of achieve some of that from it, it's really meant to get you through the harder times later. So you can call upon those feelings so you know what to do. That's the pause they're talking about. Anyway, let's move down the page. Meditation is like that too. It helps to envision our spiritual objective before we try to move toward it. When, by such simple devices, we have placed ourselves in a mood in which we can focus undisturbed on constructive imagination, we might proceed like this. Once more, we read our prayer and again try to see what its inner essence is. We'll think now about the man who first uttered the prayer. First of all, he wanted to become a channel. Then he asked for the grace to bring love, forgiveness, harmony. Okay, what I like about this part, specifically in another part later in this chapter, is while this isn't what worked for me and it isn't how I meditate and I don't pray, I do like the idea of the directive. I mean, for some people, having such a clear directive, here's what you do. You sit down, you say this prayer, you say it again and again, you try to think about the meaning. For some people, having such a clear directive can be super helpful and make something really daunting, which I think prayer and meditation is for a lot of people, a lot easier because you literally have directions here on how to start. And take him at his word, especially if you're a believer and not struggling with the God part. Just do what you're told, Act as if. Practice is practice. And you will find your own way through it, your own, you'll find your own little sense of it with time. All right, down middle of page 101. This much could be a fragment of what is called meditation, perhaps our very first attempt at a mood, a flyer into the realm of spirit, if you like. It ought to be followed by a good look at where we stand now and a further look at what might happen in our lives if we were able to move closer to the ideal we have been trying to glimpse. Meditation is something which can always be further developed. And let's always remember that meditation is in reality intensely practical. So yes, meditation is something which can always be further developed, and that's why we always call it a practice. There is no perfection, there is no end, there is no absolute in meditation. And it is intensely practical. And little did they know when they were writing this, again, the forward thinking, maybe they did know more than I think, but the science, we have science now to back up how incredibly helpful the practice of meditation is just for daily life, and not just for a sense of calmness and serenity and being able to find yourself in the present, but for just being able to focus your mind and be better focused at the tasks at hand. It has a myriad of benefits, and it is worth just getting onto Google and reading. And I always recommend Google Scholar, which is even better if you're not totally bored by scholarly articles. Okay, page 102. In the morning, we think of the hours to come. Perhaps we think of our day's work and the chances it may afford us to be useful and helpful, or of some special problem that it may bring. Possibly today, we'll see a continuation of a serious and as yet unresolved problem left over from yesterday. Our immediate temptation will be to ask for specific solutions to specific problems, and for the ability to help other people as we have already thought they should be helped. In that case, we are asking God to do it our way. Therefore, we ought to consider each request carefully to see what its real merit is. Even so, when making specific requests, it will be well to add to each one of them this qualification: if it be thy will. We ask simply that throughout the day God place us in the best understanding of his will that we can have for that day, and that we be given the grace by which we may carry it out. So here again, even though it's not what worked for me or what I did, I really like the clear directives that I think at least in the beginning can be super helpful. And I have told believer responsees, God is in the pause, right? It's the same for non-believers. When you don't know something or you don't know how to handle something, stop, take a minute, look inward, upward, whatever your thing is. Take a minute and ask for guidance. Take a minute. And don't ask for anything, just take a minute. Of course it is reasonable, moving on to read. Of course it is reasonable and understandable that the question is often asked, why can't we take a specific troubling dilemma straight to God and in prayer secure from him sure and definite answers to our requests? This can be done, but it has its hazards. We've seen AAs ask with much earnestness and faith for God's explicit guidance on matters ranging all the way from shattering domestic or financial crisis to correcting a minor personal fault like tardiness. Quite often, however, the thoughts that seem to come from God are not answers at all. They prove to be well-intentioned, unconscious rationalizations. Unconscious isn't the right word, and they use it a lot. It's subconscious, because unconscious is literally unconscious. Like when you were unconscious after eating. Subconscious rationalizations. So I've said this in a previous podcast, I think, but remember that God's quote-unquote answer could just be your own crazy. That's kind of what this is saying. Now, your crazy could be well-intentioned crazy, but it really could just be your own crazy. So if you're a believer and you're asking God for something, you're not, in my opinion, you're not asking for the answer. Rather, you're asking for the strength to keep seeking an answer, or you're asking for the humility to be able to ask someone else for help. I said it over and over again, but we pray for the hungry, then we feed them, right? All right, moving on. We also fall into another similar temptation. We form ideas as to what we think God's will is for other people. We say to ourselves, this one ought to be cured of his fatal malady, or that one ought to be relieved of his emotional pain. And we pray for these specific things. Such prayers, of course, are fundamentally good acts, but often they're based upon a supposition that we know God's will for the person for whom we pray. This means that side by side with an earnest prayer, there can be a certain amount of presumption and conceit in us. It is AA's experience that particularly in these cases, we ought to pray that God's will, whatever it is, be done for others as well as for ourselves. Now, this is where that omniscient versus omnipotent thing might come up for you, and you can sort of make a decision about your higher power there. Omniscient's going to be a lot easier in this sense because he knows. He doesn't have a hand in what's going to happen necessarily, right? I also just, this harkens back to that thing of like, in the big book where it's like, instead of criticizing other people's things, pity them, they're sicker than you are. And I don't like that. It always strikes me as like this kind of ego thing. So, my feeling would be, you do you, and maybe while doing you, someone else will look to you and ask, how can I have what you have? And then you can share your experience. And I feel like with prayer, it's sort of the same thing. Like, rather than praying for someone else, you might pray for the strength to be of service to someone else. You might pray for the strength to stay sober so that you're sober and alive because your best friend also needs to get sober. And if you don't stay sober, she may never have the opportunity. Just a little anecdote from my own life. I don't even know if that really makes sense, but like, it also seems like really judgmental to say like that one ought to be relieved of his emotional pain. Shouldn't everyone? Like, who are you to decide that one ought to, or she ought to, or he ought to, or he deserves it? If you are a believer, that's up to God. The justice and the fairness, not up to you. That's what they're saying. And my opinion is there is none. So, like, work on yourself and try to make the world better by being better. All right, last page. Perhaps one of the greatest rewards of meditation and prayer is the sense of belonging that comes to us. We no longer live in a completely hostile world. We are no longer lost and frightened and purposeless. The moment we catch even a glimpse of God's will, the moment we begin to see truth, justice, and love as the real and eternal things in life, we are no longer deeply disturbed by all the seeming evidence to the contrary that surrounds us in purely human affairs. We know that God lovingly watches over us. We know that when we turn to him, all will be well with us here and hereafter. True, I guess, believe it or not. So meditation, spending some time getting to know the good within yourself, is very powerful. When you begin to love yourself, you feel much less alone. Period. One of the problematic parts of this paragraph, I think, is that it brings out the cuckoos, the ideologues, who use this passage to rationalize their zealotry, and boy, do they use it. Boy, do they rationalize. But I'm going to finish this off with just a little one of my kind of, not a rant. Oh, I don't know what you want to call it. With or without God, life is hard. My life, and I consider my life fairly average, is punctuated by moments of joy and moments of grief. I am not happy, joyous, and free every minute of every day. I can call upon those things. I can find those things now, and I was never able to before. I find meditation very helpful because it reminds me to keep an eye out for the moments of joy. Life is not joyous all day, every day, for anyone. No matter what they post on social media. It just isn't. Real life is mostly between the 4 and the 6 on the 1 to 10 scale. You've probably heard me say that before. It has moments of 2 and moments of 8. Meditation can help you identify and find those 8 to 10 moments more readily and hold on to the feelings they create so that you have something solid to hold on to in the 1 to 3 moments. I kind of hope that makes sense. I definitely hope this helps someone, anyone. I hope some of it made sense enough to help you and to remind you, of course, that there isn't only one way to do this, but there is a way.